Greetings, brothers and sisters. So JoJo Magoo had a sort of a press conference. He gave another statement, told a bunch of lies and half-truths, like politicians do. He had it was a good session for Magoo. Sometimes either they give him drugs or he has more lucid moments. I've been saying lurid when I meant lucid. My wife had pointed out some time ago. But sometimes he just is, he's better than other days. He has his good days and bad days, and this is one of his good days. But he told multiple lies, and he still had his JoJo moments, Magoo moments. But he had a whopper of, the whopper of a statement that I'll get into that the media and most people are going to miss out on. But it just going to the cost of the war and what it would mean for you. How much money you could have had instead, all of us. So I'll get into that in just a moment. But let's start at the beginning here.
Bless our troops and our diplomats and all those serving in harm's way. And now I'll take questions. AP, Zeke Miller.
So we saw this at the G7 or G8 or whatever it's called. JoJo has handpicked, or his team, not JoJo, Magoo's team, has handpicked people that he asks questions of. And so they're either, questions that have been pre-approved, which probably is one reason for doing it. The other is having a lot of people shout at you, like most press conferences, where all these guys are shouting their questions out at once, is going to confuse Magoo. It's just too much. He's overstimulated. You can see he's not quick on his feet. As you get older, and I can speak from my own personal experience, you get overstimulated, by loud noises, and, that's why old people don't go to rock concerts or shouldn't, right? Because, the older you get, the more, that kind of chaos is harder to adjust to, right? And so JoJo Magoo, who has obviously some problems with cognition, handpicks these. They give him, a list of people, and there's no noise. There's no Mr. President, all that stuff you hear at a normal press conference. And I think he's got they screen the questions and he has the answers ready to go, right? So there's less confusion. And he said in one of these in the G7, if I go out of order, I'm in trouble. So he's got to make sure, his big thing is to make sure he reads the names in order, which seems to be a task for him. And if he doesn't do that right, he gets, whatever they do, they don't let him have his ice cream or something,
Not to help to bring out those who helped America in its war effort. We've seen these heart-wrenching images at the Kabul airport of people trying to get there, say nothing of the people who can't get to that airport. You made the commitment to get American troops out, to get American citizens out. Will you make the same commitment to those who assisted in the American war effort over the last 20 years, number one? And then number two, what is your message to America's partners around the world who have criticized not the withdrawal, but the conduct of that withdrawal and made them question America's credibility on the world stage?
I have seen no question of our credibility from our allies around the world. I've spoken with our NATO allies. We've spoken with NATO allies, the Secretary of State. Our National Security Advisor has been in contact with his counterparts throughout the world and our allies, as has the general, I keep calling him a general, but my Secretary of Defense. The fact of the matter is, I have not seen that. As a matter of fact, the exact opposite I've gotten.
That's simply not true. He's not great here. He is a little bit confused. He's a little bit shaky there in his response. It isn't like he is, having such, isn't like he's having big senior sort of moments there, but he's a little bit confused. But it's an out-and-out lie. And the media still isn't, they're hammering him a little bit, but they didn't call him on this. Biden assured allies in June U.S. would ensure Kabul's stability. And the NPR, again, liberal-leaning sort of organizations, Biden's handling of Afghanistan has angered some allies. So they're clearly not happy because, for example, it says here that the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and other leaders at the Group of Seven summit in Cornwall, England, that critical U.S. enablers would remain in place to keep Kabul safe following the drawdown of NATO forces. And they left their embassy open They wanted to leave their embassy open. So Britain is struggling with the decision or the way this thing has gone down. And they didn't think very much of Biden. You could see Boris Johnson at NATO like shut Joe Biden up, right? When he was running a meeting and JoJo was talking out of turn. I showed you that clip. And so they were already, they were already bumming. So they might be saying that to him because he's confused and old and they don't want to, get on the wrong side of Magoo at this point, but they're not happy. Frustration among U.S. allies scrambling to leave Afghanistan. They're all in the same boat and they have to answer to their countries. And so Magoo saying, yeah, they're all 100. Well, yeah, that might be what they're telling you, but they're not happy. Like they can't be happy with this. They're all scrambling. It's a complete S show out there.
The exact opposite thing is we're acting with dispatch. We're committing to what we said we would do. Look, let's put this thing in perspective here. What interest do we have in Afghanistan at this point with al-Qaeda gone? We went to Afghanistan for the express purpose of getting rid of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, as well as getting Osama bin Laden. And we did. Just imagine if bin Laden had decided with al-Qaeda to launch an attack from Yemen, would we ever gone to Afghanistan? Would there ever be any reason we'd be in Afghanistan? Controlled by the Taliban? What is the national interest of the United States in that circumstance? We went and did the mission. You've known my position.
So the official story here, think about what he's saying, because the official story is that on May 1st of 2011, the American SEAL Team 6 went in and killed bin Laden in Pakistan, not Afghanistan, but Pakistan. He had been in Pakistan for a number of years. Early on in 2001 or 2, right? And so JoJo Magoo is saying that once they got bin Laden, there was no reason to be in Afghanistan. And so that means in 2001 or 2002, when he was senator, and then when he was president and vice president in 2008, it was long overdue that they should have left in early 2002, 2003, when bin Laden fled to Pakistan mountains. He was there for, years. And they got him in 2011, so then there was definitely no reason to be there. But Biden put in another 30,000 troops, which, not Biden, Obama put in another 30,000 troops, and there was a surge, and then they were planning to leave in 2014. But what JoJo Magoo is saying here is they could have been out as early as 2002, and certainly after 2011, when bin Laden was, whatever that weird thing that happened there, that was, bizarre in itself, hard to believe kind of stuff. And so if you think about it, like what he's saying here should be called upon, the mainstream media who believes in the official story should be like, wait a minute, you're saying that the only reason to go there was to get rid of this guy, and you got rid of the guy. He moved out of the country, so now you should have been in Pakistan. And then, that never happened for another 8 or 9 years. And then they finally got him, according to the official story. And then they should have left. That's what JoJo Magoo is saying. That every American citizen who died, or all the money, and I'm going to get into the money in a bit, that was spent, was unnecessary. Which is a huge claim, which goes over many presidencies and his vice presidency and his time as senator and the military-industrial complex and all of it. And the military, he's saying a huge thing here that's just going to be passed over because, they should have been there. They should have been out of there at least 10 years ago. At the very least, or the very most, 10 years ago, they should have left.
For a long, long time. It's time to end this war. The estimates of the cost of this war over the last 20 years range from a minimum of $1 trillion to a think tank at one of the universities saying $2 trillion. That's somewhere between $150 million a day and $300 million a day.
So this is a huge moment, not so much a gaffe, but what he admitted here. Just think about what he admitted in the mainstream media, and I don't know how many people, even the truth community, are going to think about this or talk about it. But it is the big statement, one of the biggest statements about this whole disaster. They don't know how much the war costs. JoJo Magoo just said, we don't know how much the war cost. He just admitted there might be a missing $1 trillion. He said it might cost, they're saying it costs a minimum of $1 trillion. We know we spent $1 trillion, but we could have spent maybe 2. We don't know. We don't know whether we spent 1 or 2. It could be 1, could be 2. $1 trillion is $1 million, right? So it's $1 million. And so, think about that, right? I mean, just the scope of this thing. And they don't know if there's another $1 trillion out there that was spent that's not accounted for. Where did that $1 trillion go? So it could have cost $2 trillion. They said it's either $150 million a day. $150 million a day were dumped into this failure, this turd of a war, right? Disastrous on every level. Complete failure. We're going to get into some of it, the failure as we go through this. And it could have been up to $300 million. Every day, America dumping $300 million into this failed war. That could have, under JoJo's, he's already admitted, we could have been out there as soon as bin Laden was in Pakistan. There was no reason to be in Afghanistan after that. That's what he's saying. As president, as senator who voted for this war, as vice president who was a part of this foreign policy, someone who was a lifelong politician. He was a senator while Bush was president, and he was vice president under Obama. And so for all these years, they have no trouble blaming Trump, right? But for all these years before that, before Trump, we shouldn't have ever been in there. And Trump was the first president, and I'm not, a Trumper, but, Trump was the first president to get us, somewhat on a path to get out of there. Remember I showed you the clip where Biden said that we were going to get out in 2014 for sure, period, no questions asked. And that was 7 years ago. So think about all the money that's been spent. $1 trillion is possibly missing. And I talked about this, that the $2 trillion that was spent in Iraq, which is probably conservative, might be $3 trillion. So it might be a total of $5 trillion on these two wars, to say nothing of the military actions in Libya and in these countries being destroyed, in Egypt, and then whatever happened in Syria. And so then all the arming of these countries too. So who knows what the final price tag. But let's just say it's $4 trillion. That's minimum. I mean, it's much, much more, but that's minimum. That means it's $4 million. It's a crazy amount of money, and JoJo Magoo was part of this whole thing. At the beginning, he was all for it, and then he was a part of it all along. And now he's saying, well, we didn't have to be there, right? And this is what it's cost. He's using his past mistakes and Bush's and Obama's past mistakes and all these people that went along with it, all these, it's supposed to be congressional oversight. And then as vice president, he said this whole time he's been endorsing something, he's been behind something that should have ended about 18, 19 years ago, at the very least 12, 11 years, for sure 11 or 12 years ago, after Operation, whatever they call it. Operation Neptune's Spear, Neptune, the god of the ocean, his trident, I don't know what the hell, right? I mean, it's just bizarre. When that happened in 2011, there was no reason for the next 10 years for U.S. to spend the money we spent. And so this is him saying, hey, look, we wasted all this money there for the past 19 years. I'm a hero for ending this thing. Yeah, but you could have spoke up, 19 years ago. And then again, 2011, when you're running for vice president and you said we'll be out by 2014, and that didn't happen. And so, and then blame Trump for actually working to get us out of there and starting the process of withdrawing troops and making a deal with the Taliban. And so instead of hammering Trump, you should be talking about, see, the problem here with the mainstream media is they're not asking the question. This is, why aren't you blaming Obama? Why didn't Obama get out in 2012 when he was elected for his second term? Why didn't he get out in 2009 when he was sworn in for his first term, and he promised to end these wars. That was part of what he campaigned on. America was done with these wars. Why did Obama and Hillary Clinton and you have this Arab Spring where you were arming the world? I mean, they were, supplying arms to Syria and these other countries. And then we had 3 military actions in Libya, in, Egypt, and then tried to invade Syria. Why did you do all those things? Why did you back all those things? Did Obama make a mistake with all this money you're talking we wasted, right? And these were all bad policies. What about the American military brass who, put you up to this, right? They should be asking these questions. Like they're kind of asking. This is what you get when you handpick your questioners, right? They're not asking, well, how much responsibility does your president, President my boss, remember?
Because they invaded another country and annexed a significant portion of it called Crimea. Right. He's saying that it was President my boss, it was his fault.
That how much does he bear? How much responsibility does he bear? You blame Trump, but Obama and Bush are much more at fault. Why don't you talk about them and you as vice president and senator?
The threat from terrorism has metastasized. There's a greater danger from ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all these affiliates in other countries by far than there is from Afghanistan. And we're going to retain an over-the-horizon capability that if they were to come back to be able to take them out. Surgically move.
Surgically moved?
Surgically move.
Surgically move?
Surgically move.
Remember what a problem ISIS was under Obama. ISIS was, the worst thing ever. And then Trump came in and said he had a plan to get rid of ISIS. And Trump's no great guy. I mean, I'm not a Trumper. But Trump's plan was tell the CIA to stop telling ISIS, which was an asset, which was the old Iraqi Republican Guard. I've covered this in so many videos, to stop doing crap, right? And that's what happened. So, this is all like just... it's just a complete fabrication. Anybody with some critical thinking skills could understand that if ISIS disappeared for 4 years under Trump, there's a reason. Like they were everywhere for the last 3 or 4 years of the Obama administration, and they didn't do one thing under Trump, right, when Trump was there.
So this is where we should be. This is about America leading the world, and all our allies have agreed with that. And by the way, before I made this decision, I was at the G7 as well as met with our NATO partners. And I told them all, every one of them knew and agreed with the decision I made to jointly end our involvement in Afghanistan.
And so this is a meeting at the G7, and Boris Johnson, the host of the G7 from England, it just introduced all the people at the table. And Biden didn't hear him, and he decides to speak out of turn. And Boris Johnson says, well, I already did that. So you can watch this here. But this is, And
just say how pleased I am to welcome those who have just joined us, bringing some pretty spectacular weather with them. Prime Minister Modi, President Ramaphosa, President Moon, in just a minute. And the President of South Africa. And the President of South Africa, as I said earlier. Oh, you did.
Oh, you did. As I said earlier. Oh, you did.
As I said earlier. Oh, you did. I did not. I certainly did.
I certainly did. And you're looking all confused. This happened a bunch of times, where JoJo Magoo thought he was rocking it, like he gives the double fist here when he says the president of South Africa.
And the president of South Africa.
He points to him very dramatically.
President of South Africa. And the president.
Boom, and he gives him the double fist. And Boris Johnson's like, yeah, I already introduced him. Oh, you did? Like, so Joe Biden thought he was rocking it, but clearly they were like, oh, who's this doddering old fool? They probably didn't have a high opinion of JoJo Magoo when he was vice president, right? Because, he was always a gaffe magnet and kind of a tool, and he always, did stupid stuff like this. And now it's much worse. He's got, later stages of dementia and things. And so The international community doesn't respect this guy, but he's completely oblivious to it because he's, he's gone, right?
The first part of your question was, I can't remember now.
Would you commit to the same commitment? Would you make the same commitment to bring out Afghans who assisted in the war effort?
Yes, we're making the same commitment. There's no one more important than bringing American citizens out. I acknowledge that. But they're equally important almost is all those SIVs, we call them, who in fact helped us. They were translators. They went into battle with us. They were part of the operation. As well as we're also trying to get out as many NGOs, non-government organizations, women's organizations, et cetera. We're doing all we can. In the meantime, Secretary Blinken and I am going to be working with our allies to see to it that we can bring international pressure.
That dude behind him wants no part of this, right? Like these guys are out there answering questions at press conferences and getting hammered, right? For this debacle. And like Joe Biden's like, oh yeah, we're rocking it. Like he's so far gone from where, even the media that's been hiding him and, propping him up for the last 3 years has turned on him to some extent. And he's so oblivious to it. And these other guys are like, don't drag me into this, bro.
On the Taliban they're looking to gain some legitimacy. They're going to have to figure out how they're going to maintain that country. And there's going to be harsh conditions, strong conditions we're going to apply, and it will depend on whether they get help based on whether or not how and well they treat women and girls, how they treat their citizens.
Because no one knows more about how to treat women and girls better than JoJo Magoo. He's going to give the Taliban snoozling, sniffing, groping, biting seminar, and then they'll be straight. Then they can get help along with the billions of dollars in weapons, American weapons they now have.
So this is just beginning on that score.
Stay past the 31st to make that happen, to bring all the Americans out, to bring those SIVs out.
I think we can get it done by then, but we're going to make that judgment as we go. Now, Justin Sink of Bloomberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. You just said that you would keep a laser focus on counterterrorism efforts.
And who's more laser focused than JoJo Magoo? I mean, he only walks backwards off the stage some of the times and forgets the name of his boss some of the times. He's laser focused. He's honed in.
You don't see as great of a threat of terrorism from Afghanistan as other parts of the world. But if you and your administration so badly misassessed how quickly the Taliban would sweep through Afghanistan, and we no longer have an embassy there from which to run intelligence operations, how can you at all be confident of your assessment of the risk of terrorism and the ability of the U.S. to conduct over-the-horizon missions to keep it in check? Can you tell Americans that they're safe and will remain safe from terror attacks in Afghanistan?
See, this is actually kind of an okay question, good question for a mainstream media person because, they go with the narrow bandwidth of the official story. But in terms of what he just asked, what he said was, you guys completely effed up your assessment of what was going to go down in Kabul. And they're giving it multiple versions. Some people say, oh, yeah, we knew this was going to happen. Others say, oh, there's no way we could have predicted this, right? How quickly the Taliban took over. I mean, there's various, they're giving mixed messages. But when you F up something this bad, and I'm not talking about just the exit, the whole war. When you've effed up this whole war so bad that you're worse off, everybody's worse off, and I'll get into that later, than they were before, and the situation is worse off, then how can you claim, the intelligence say this? How can we ever trust the intelligence community again? And they've gotten lots of things wrong, right? I mean, the event in 2001, they said they had no way of predicting. So what good is the intelligence community that spies on all of us, that puts out disinformation and lies, is an underhanded, CIA and the NSA and these other groups, what good are they if they get things so wrong? Like, why go through the whole, evil of having an intelligence community when they fail time and time again, and the military brass and politicians? Like, if you're going to screw up this bad, we could just, get like some random monkey to, make decisions and press buttons and we'd probably come out with basically the same level of competency.
I think you're comparing apples and oranges. One question was whether or not the Afghan forces we trained up would stay and fight in their own civil war they had going on.
The same ones that couldn't do jumping jacks, and JoJo Magoo, when he was vice president, said that there was 24 known cases where Afghan troops that were trained by Americans, I mean, I showed you this quote multiple times in recent videos. He said there was 24 times of blue on green shooting where the Afghans shot at Americans. And he said, if they keep it up, we won't do joint missions together, going out and fighting Taliban together or whoever. We'll just train them at the army base. And so there was, come on, nobody thought these guys were going to stand up. There was zero evidence that they were going to stand up, right? Like everybody knew it. Like this has been known for years. You know, like one of his big excuses was, well, we could do another year, another 5 years, but these guys were never going to stand up. And now he's saying, well, how could we know? Well, you knew because you were saying we can't go here another 5 years. What difference does it make? You know, we've put in 20 years of military training and giving them weapons and things, and after 20 years they're not willing to fight. They're not going to fight after 5 years. Yeah, well, they weren't going to fight after 1 year, and that was known. There was an expert on there. I showed you him on CNN, and he said some, former colonel or something, and he said he knew after 1 year that this was going to happen. Nobody believed these guys were going to fight, right? So you can't have it both ways, Magoo.
No one, I shouldn't say no one, the consensus was that it was highly unlikely that in 11 days they'd collapse and fall and the leader of Afghanistan would flee the country.
So you knew it was a possibility then. It was highly unlikely. That means that it's a possibility and was a part of your scenario. It might happen. So don't say we didn't know. It was something that was on the table. It is the most likely scenario given everything we know about the trained Afghanistan army.
That's a very different question than whether or not there is the ability to observe whether or not large groups of terrorists begin to accumulate in a particular area in Afghanistan to plot against the United States of America. That's why we retained an over-the-horizon capability to go in and do something about that if that occurs. But in the meantime, we know what's happened around the world. We know what's happening in terms of what's going on in other countries where there is a significant rise of terrorist organizations in the Middle East, in East Africa, and other places. And so the bottom line is we're dealing with those terrorist threats from other parts of the world and failed states without permanent military presence there. We have to do the same in Afghanistan.
So the problem with this is, and you should think about this as an American, this policy, this new policy he keeps on bragging about. And so when there's military action, the United States just can't go and declare war on countries without the UN permission. I mean, in terms of international support. Like that's what America got in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so if America just starts declaring war on countries, there'll be problems, economic problems, and a lot of things, when there's no international support for something. And the president's supposed to get the okay from Congress to go in and declare war. And so what he's saying is that now he thinks he has permission to go and do selective military strikes in countries, sovereign countries, bomb their people, drone their people. And what about Americans, right? I mean, it's not okay to do this to anybody. It's not okay for one country, whether it's your country or Russia or China or any country, to go and bomb other people, citizens in other countries. If you think, again, the intelligence, look at how much the intelligence has gotten wrong. And think about the disaster when Colin Powell was tricked into going in front of the UN and claiming Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction that he never had, and Dick Cheney manipulated him and his people, Rumsfeld and Paul Wolfowitz and all them MNFers, right? Those neocons, they all manipulated that intelligence, and it came out later, and they lied to the UN about the reason we went to the in Iraq for the Iraq War that killed over 1 million Iraqi people. And so the international community and everyone else should say, hey, America, stop doing crap like this. In fact, when you make this big a mistake, right? I mean, these international mistakes are being made. And so to say we have guaranteed intelligence when our intelligence is proven wrong time and time again and been manipulated and misguided. So if you're going to other countries and droning and bombing people, civilians, and you're not even sure that they're a threat, or there might be innocent people around them that also are casualties, that's not cool. Like, what if there was some, bad actors, so to speak, in your neighborhood and, some cul-de-sac, right, living in some suburban neighborhood, and they bombed the house and they took out three other houses and some kids riding their bikes on the street. Would that be cool with you, right? That kind of precision military action. And so this is, the media is so weak and so, pro whatever the CIA and the military industrial complex tells them to be for, that they don't ever ask these questions. But if they're real media, they'd be like, well, that isn't a good policy. Going into sovereign nations and doing military strikes based in intelligence when the guy just asked him a question about his faulty intelligence,
Sir, just on that initial assessment, we learned over the last 24 hours that there was a dissent cable from the State Department.
Sure.
Saying that the Taliban would come faster through Afghanistan. Can you say why, after that cable was issued, the U.S. didn't do more to get Americans out?
All kinds of cables, all kinds of advice. If you notice, it ranged from this group saying that they didn't say it'd fall when it would fall, when it did fall, but saying that it would fall, to others saying it wouldn't happen for a long time and they'd be able to sustain themselves through the end of the year. I made the decision. The buck stops with me.
Does it, though? We all heard you blame Trump, and we all heard you blame, the other presidents and the faulty policies of the Afghanistan war policies of the, intelligence community and the military brass. But, you're willing to share the blame, right? So, yeah, the buck stops with you, then you should resign, right? Because this is one of the worst things we've seen with the border crisis. Now, Trump didn't have anything this bad. COVID wasn't Trump's fault. I mean, you could try to blame it on him, the handling of it. But, there was something it was a mess from the beginning. And it was certainly not just whatever, Trump's fault or whatever. Trump went along with it. He was a part of the problem. But in terms of what happened in the border crisis in the America's southern border and this withdrawal, you've only been in office for 6 months and you have two huge complete screw-ups, and you were known as a screw-up beforehand. Like, you were known as a bumbling idiot and more, worse things before you were president.
I took the consensus opinion. The consensus opinion was that, in fact, it would not occur, if it occurred, until later in the year. So it was my decision. Now my next is Stephanie Ramos, ABC.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. President. 2 questions for you. The military has secured the airport, as you mentioned, but will you sign off on sending U.S. troops into Kabul to evacuate Americans who haven't been able to get to the airport safely?
We have no indication that they haven't been able to get in Kabul through the airport. We've made an agreement with the Taliban thus far. They've allowed them to go through. It's in their interest for them to go through. So we know of no circumstance where American citizens are carrying an American passport are trying to get through to the airport. But we will do whatever needs to be done to see to it they get to the airport.
So the reason I found out about this press conference, people think I watch the news all the time, and I don't. Like, people send me things or I see headlines, and I'm like, oh, where did he say that? And so I saw this from the New York Post, which is just having its best days because of a combination of Andrew Cuomo's and Joe Biden both collapsing. Biden contradicted by Pentagon on claims Al-Qaeda gone and Taliban letting Americans reach the Kabul airport. And so they're saying here that a United Nations report that said that the Afghan provinces and the Pentagon spokesman John Kirby confirmed Thursday afternoon, we know that Al-Qaeda is a presence as well as ISIS in Afghanistan, and we talked about that for quite some time. So they're contradicting Biden's, biggest assertion here. Again, this isn't, something that I the whole thing to me is just a show. But the biggest part is where he said that we know of no circumstance where the American citizens are carrying American passport or trying to get through to the airport. So you just heard that from JoJo Magoo. And he's going to double down on that in just a moment. But then they have other people here. So this person wrote, for me to be 10 feet from a U.S. Marines with my 3-year-old son with my U.S. passport and not being able to get through, that's problematic. So this is an American citizen right here who is saying that. And there's a number of other people. And so what's happening there is, and there's multiple other quotes from people saying they can't get out, is that they have and Joe Biden's going to be talking about it, they have, walled off the area, sort of a green zone where the Americans are. And it is surrounded by Afghanis who want to get out of the country. And Americans are having trouble getting through those hordes of people. Like you think in a disaster movie where you see some kind of situation like World War Z or one of these disaster movies where there's so many people outside the gate and there's somebody who's like a star of the movie who has to get in and they have credentials but can't reach the gate. But then other people are having trouble getting through the checkpoints and even making it to that area. So Joe Biden has been called out as, lying. Like he's not even getting the same intelligence because people in his intelligence community and his administration are saying other things than what he's saying. And he seems to believe what he's saying. So he's either lost or confused or he can't, remember things. I mean, it's so bad, right? Like Joe Biden, he's having a good press conference. I almost didn't cover it because I watched it. I'm like, well, he did a pretty good job for JoJo Magoo. Even though he's lying and he's, his facts are off, there's something that you have to fact check him. He's just not babbling and, saying things that are crazy and making gaffes. He's lying or he's misrepresenting the facts or he doesn't understand them. But you have to go and do some research, which most people don't because they don't even cover his ridiculous gaffes and senior moments. But clearly his major points, the things that he came in to say, are not factual. They're not backed up by his administration and what's happening on the ground, his intelligence people, and what's happening there in Afghanistan.
And one more, Mr. President. Last month, my colleague Martha Raddatz interviewed Abdul, an interpreter who was on the front lines with U.S. forces in Afghanistan. Overnight, we received a photo of Taliban militants coming to the door of his home, literally hunting him down. Thankfully, he was able to escape, but he is obviously still in mortal danger. What would be your message to Abdul, his wife, and his 3 young daughters?
We want you to be able to get to the airport. Contact us. We'll see whatever we can do to get you there. We've got to get you out. We are committed to deal with you, your wife, and your child to get all 3 of you out of Afghanistan.
So you're such a compassionate dude. Come on, man. He cares so much about Abdul. He just wants to get him out, right? And so, like it's just that easy for the guy to get out. So this is not a great headline because it turns out not to be accurate. Afghan interpreter pleads with Biden to save his family during CNN interview. Please save me and my family. But I'm not sure he's talking to Biden. You can hear it right here.
One man who only wants to use his first name, Abdul, to protect his safety. He worked for 5 years as an interpreter for U.S. Special Forces. He's a visa applicant stranded inside Afghanistan right now, and he's frightened, leaving this voicemail with my next guest just this morning.
Why have the American soldiers forgotten about us after everything we did? The sacrifices we made. Why are you leaving us behind? I don't want to be killed by the Taliban.
That's the commitment.
Thank you, sir.
Meredith Lee of PBS NewsHour.
You mentioned just now using every resource available for evacuations. Why haven't you ordered the military to expand the security perimeter around the Kabul airport? Do you have any plans to do so, given that will likely require more U.S. troops? And are you considering rescue operations to recover Americans and Afghan allies stuck behind Taliban checkpoints?
The answer is yes to the last question. We're considering every opportunity and every means by which we could get folks to the airport. That's number one. Number two, the reason why we have not gone out and started and set up a perimeter way outside the airport in Kabul is that it's likely to draw an awful lot of unintended consequences in terms of people who, in fact, are not part of the Taliban. We've been in constant contact with the Taliban leadership on the ground in Kabul, as well as the Taliban leadership at Daho. And we've been coordinating what we were doing. That's why we were able, for example, how we got all of our embassy personnel out, how we got everyone out of the embassy safely. That was the distance. That's how we helped get the French out and out of their embassy. So the question remains, there will be judgments made on the ground by the military commanders at the moment, and that I cannot second guess each of those judgments to be made. But the idea of, again, let me get back to the fundamental point I made at the outset.
See, this is where JoJo starts to lose it, right? Now he's incoherent. He's gone off the rails. He's not answering her question. His answers are getting diffuse. I mean, he's looking down at his notes. It's only 10 minutes of questioning. He read a statement. That was about 10 minutes. Then he answered a few questions. They're about to roll him out of there, right? He answers about 6-7 questions, and they are predetermined, the people he's asked. We're going to ask him the questions, so it's controlled. And now you can hear him babbling, right? He's starting to lose it. Like, you don't know what he's saying. Like, you need an interpreter to figure out what he's saying. He jumps around. He doesn't complete his points. He's not talking coherently. And then he gets himself in more trouble here.
When the decision was made by me and it was made some time ago, and I ran 4 presidents saying I wanted to get us out of Afghanistan. One of the things that is a reality is people now say to me and to others, and many of you say it on air, that why did we have to move because no Americans are being attacked? Why did we withdraw why did we agree to withdraw 2,500 troops? No Americans are being attacked. As I said before, the reason they weren't being attacked was part of an agreement that Trump had made a year earlier. We will leave by May 1st, he said, as long as there's no attack on Americans in that year period. Number one. Number two, the Taliban was taking large swaths of the countryside, north and south.
See, he just got caught in another lie. He said over and over again, we didn't know there would be any chance, or at least it didn't seem likely. He said it's a possibility that within 11 days, the Afghan military would fold and the Taliban would take over, right? And now he's saying, he's going to go on to say they didn't take any major city, but the Taliban was expanding their control. And Trump made a deal with the Taliban saying, we'll get out of the country, leaving it to you. So Trump knew, and the people who were, advising Trump, because Trump didn't know anything about Afghanistan on his own. This was what the military intelligence was telling him. They had to negotiate with the Taliban. Don't attack us for a year, and we'll leave. And so Biden was locked in that way, at least he feels that he was, to either bring in more troops and go against Trump's promise or get out of there, which he wanted to do all along. So he knew, everyone knew, that the Taliban was just waiting for America to leave to take over. That's well known. That's why they're leaving Americans alone, because there's no reason to waste to lose Taliban lives fighting with Americans when the Americans are leaving. Why would you make it more difficult? It would be stupid to do that. Prolong it, right? Do something where the Americans feel that they have to stay longer or whatever it is, right? And so he's caught in, all these conflicting stories, and the mainstream media just won't confront him on it, right? Because they just, they just suck so bad. Where's Snopes when you need them?
None of the major areas, none of the major points of the capitals of each of these provinces, but they were all over the country. And the idea that if I had said on May the 2nd or 3rd, we are not leaving, we are staying, does anybody truly believe that I would not have had to put in significantly more American forces, send your sons, your daughters, like my son was sent to Iraq, to maybe die? And for what? For what? So the only rational thing to do, in my view, was to set up and pre-position American forces for the purpose of evacuation, and the aircraft to pre-position those ahead of time so that we would be able to begin the process of evacuation of American citizens, SIVs, and others who helped us.
See, there's two criticisms. One, he should have stuck with Trump's date because that's what the Taliban was abiding by, right? And so the Taliban, once that date came and went, they were like, well, we didn't attack you for a year, you guys are still here, right? And so, like, if he was going to stick to Trump's whatever, he should have stuck with Trump's schedule. And he could have done that, right? Or extend it in some negotiations with the Taliban. Not to go and take over the whole country until you got everybody out of there. Apparently, my wife just came in and said there's reports that Afghan citizens are beating Americans up, which, Americans, you should get used to that, because when, America goes tits up, which is happening pretty rapidly, when you travel now in most places, people want Americans, they want American tourist dollars, they want American businesses, they're pro-American, for the most part. I mean, you're going to find, whatever, you're going to have some unhappy campers. But when you travel, you're going to be treated fairly well in most countries. And that's not going to be the case. America's going to be blamed for a lot of the stuff that's about to happen. And so, that's already happening. But anyways, so he didn't stick with Trump's May 4th or whatever date he gave with the Taliban. And he didn't get people out ahead of time and tell them, you guys better get the hell out of here. It's going to get reals. And so, the Taliban took over in record time, right? And now, they're not going to get everybody out. That's going to be a disaster. So we'll come back to that.
The last point I'll make is this. Look, if we had decided 15 years ago to leave Afghanistan, it would have been really difficult. If we decided 5 years ago, if we continued the war for another decade and tried to leave, there's no way in which you'd be able to leave Afghanistan without there being some of what you're seeing now. But what we've done so far is we've been able to get a large number of Americans out, all our personnel at the embassy out, and so on. And thank God, so far, knock on wood, we're in a different position.
That was great. He couldn't find any wood. Joe can't find any wood these days. Watch.
Knock on wood. Knock on wood. Knock on wood.
Apparently, Magoo is woodless.
Scott Detro. Scott. NPR.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to follow up on something you said a moment ago. You said that there's no circumstances where American citizens cannot get to the airport. That doesn't really square with the images we're seeing around the airport, with the reporting on the ground from our colleagues who are describing chaos and violence. Are you saying unequivocally that any American who wants to get to the airport is getting there and getting past the security barrier and to the planes where they want to go?
I thought the question was, how can they get through to the airport outside the airport? And the answer is, to the best of our knowledge, the Taliban checkpoints, they are letting through people showing American passports. Now, that's a different question when they get in the rush and crowd of all the folks just outside the wall near the airport. That's why we had to, I guess, was it yesterday or the day before, we went over the wall and brought in, how many? 169 Americans.
See, the place is surrounded by people who want to get out of Afghanistan. You know, Afghanis or anybody else, people from other countries. And there's not that many troops, and there's, you know, they went over the wall and they're trying to fish out Americans out of this crowd, right? Like, you know, think about like some giant concert or sporting event where there's 60,000 people all in line, you know, masses of people screaming and yelling and, you know, sitting there all day, right? I mean, there for hours and hours trying to get in, flipped out, scared for their lives. And you got to go through and figure out which people are Americans, never mind people who, you know, helped Americans.
So it is a process to try to figure out how we deal with the mad rush of non-Americans, those who didn't help, those who are not on the priority list, just any Afghan to be able to get out of the country. And so my guess is that no matter what, under what circumstances there's not a whole lot of Afghanis. There's a whole lot of Afghanis that just as soon come to America, whether they're any involvement with the United States in the past at all, rather than stay under Taliban rule or any rule.
See, a country might be a crappy country. And it might be, you know, I mean, before America goes in to invade, it's not as good as, the people there don't have it as good as Americans have it in terms of their lifestyle, right? So any country that America invades, people are like, hey, I want to go live in America. I mean, that's what, you know, people around the world think. They think America is so much better than where they are because that's how America presents itself. And so most people, you know, with the Hollywood movies and all they see about America, I mean, if you go to airports around the world, my wife and my kids were talking about it. The airport that we went in Dubai, you know, we stopped in Dubai, we stopped in, I forget where it was, Qatar, and, you know, even the airports that we went in India are better than American airports. Some of them are significantly better than American airports. A lot of these countries' airports are modern and new, where American airports are run down. American roads are, you know, in many cases, America's a lot worse than people think it is. It's, you know, but people judge it by America in the past. America's still great in terms of lifestyle compared to every other countries because of the, you know, inequality of our currency, the devaluing of other countries' currencies, and our military. But America isn't as great as people think it is. Like, many of us know that. You know, there's, you know, I mean, it's worse in other countries, but, you know, better too, depending on how you look at it, how you evaluate it. But when America goes invades a country and leaves it with crappy leadership like they're doing here and like we did in Vietnam and Iraq, the people who live there realize that their country, first, their infrastructure has been bombed and taken a hit because America's done damage. This is going back all the way to Germany in World War II, where the citizens realize that their country is going to be a lot worse after getting Americaned by the American military, and that things are, you know, maybe they can hitch on with the American plane and get out of Dodge and start over in America. This happens constantly, even with small little military exercises in Kosovo or Bosnia or wherever it might be over the years. And so that's what's happening here, but even on a bigger scale, because the Taliban are like the big bad wolf, right? And America's just effed over that country because it's going to be way worse now than before America got there.
So what I was saying is that we have an agreement that they will let pass through the checkpoints that the Taliban control, and let Americans through.
But given the negotiations with the Taliban, the scenes that we're seeing, can you just fully explain why the plan wasn't to go ahead with these evacuations of both Americans and allies before the drawdowns began, before Bagram was closed, looking back several months, because whether it was now or several months from now, there seems to be a broad consensus that the Taliban would make these gains and these would be needed at some point.
Well, yeah, at some point. But the point was that although we were in contact with the Taliban and Doha for this whole period of time, at some point wasn't expected to be the total demise of the Afghan national force.
But you already said it was a possibility. You said it was unlikely, but it was possible. And so worst case scenario, which has come true, and you could have evacuated a lot of these people ahead of time and told the rest of them to be ready, right? Or built temporary housing for people to stay in until it was time to evacuate.
Which was 300 persons. Let's assume the Afghan national force had continued to fight and they were surrounding Kabul. Be a very different story.
But that's not what happened. Like, we pay you, right? The reason your candidacy was successful or whatever, right? In terms of the way he ran as a candidate was he was an insider and he was going to redo all the stuff the outsider Trump did. And that as an insider, he was going to listen to his advisors and they were going to make the right decisions and they were going to avoid these kind of screw-ups. But this is a bigger screw-up than Trump ever had. This is a monumental screw-up. You got it wrong. Your intelligence community or whatever it was, right? Whatever happened here, you got it wrong. You did it the wrong way. You read the room wrong. You read the situation wrong. And now it's a mess, right? And that's what you got to say, that you got it wrong, not saying, how could we know, right? That's the same thing they said in 2001. We could have never known this was going to happen, right? And so that usually means they knew it was going to happen and they just have no other excuse, right? We'll get back to this.
Very different story. But the overwhelming consensus was that they were not going to collapse. The Afghan forces, they were not going to leave. They were not going to just abandon and then put down their arms and take off. So that's what happened. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
And again, he, blamed the Afghani troops like he did before in his first press conference after saying the buck stops with him, but it doesn't because you get paid to get it right. And if you get it wrong, not this wrong, right? And so let me just go through a few more things here. I'm losing my voice. I didn't want to make this long of a video. It just happened. So these are the headlines, mostly from pro-Joe Biden. This is MSNBC. U.S. tracking ISIS threats against Kabul's airport. Americans trying to leave. Biden allies frustrated with media's hawkish coverage of Afghanistan withdrawal. After years of ignoring Afghanistan, many close to Biden White House and the president himself feel like some major outlets are adopting a pro-war stance. This is the media turning on him. This is Huffington Post that was saying how great it was that he was standing up against the war hawks, even though he's been a war hawk his entire political career. So this is, it says War Chest. And this is from New York Post yesterday. And I want to come back to this. But it led to this article. Taliban has billions in U.S. weapons, including Black Hawk helicopters, we already said, 166, and up to 600,000 rifles. This is the Taliban with American weapons. And after all of this, right, the mainstream media turning on Joe Biden, his complete meltdown and debacle here, and just years of failure of the political establishment, the military, and the intelligence community, and all the wasted money, well above $4 trillion, maybe up to, who knows how many trillions of dollars were looted out of America by this debacle, this war. Biden's approval rating flips for the first time amid Afghan crisis. And so the measure, which combines the results of recent national surveys, pegged Biden at 48% disapproval, nearly a full percentage point greater than 47.8 before. And so he only lost 1 percentage point. You know, think about that. After this complete horror show, he's only down a percentage point. This is what we saw with Trump, and this is what we saw with every president before them. People are so divided amongst party lines that none of these screw-ups really matter. Doesn't really matter because they're just going to, they're going to stick with their dude, whoever it is. The guy has to have almost a complete meltdown where he yells at his own people or reverses his position on things that his backers like to lose support. Remember this?
But I want to say one thing to the American people. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never. These allegations are false, and I need to go back to work for the American people.
You have to understand that event to understand what's going on now with JoJo Magoo, and also what happened with Trump and the impeachment. See, Bill Clinton lied, and this is back when there was more morality in America, even amongst Democrats, and it was much more conservative, moral place. Bill Clinton had an affair with an 18-year-old intern and lied about it in the Oval Office at his job in one of these places that's supposed to be sort of sacred. It got really seedy, and the details became more and more seedy. He lied about it to the American people in this speech, but also perjured himself, and so that's a felony, and he somehow kept his job, right? Back then I was a Democrat, my family was lifelong Democrats, and I knew this was effed up. He should have been fired. Like Bill Clinton should have been fired, because if you cheat on your wife with an intern at your job, especially something like this, it becomes a huge scandal, and you lie about it and get caught, and you're kind of a dick about it when you do lie, being sort of like obstinate and angry, right, the way he was, you should lose your job. But more than that, when he was, he really didn't lose a lot of support. He went out as a fairly popular president, especially amongst Democrats, even though the Republicans hated him for years. It became okay to lie. Sort of the same thing happened with Nixon. We saw a degradation of politics and the presidency because there was one scandal after another, and it became pretty clear that politicians lie. JoJo Magoo was one of those scandals. He lied about, he stole other people's speeches, and he got caught lying over and over again as a congressman, for 47 years, and as a vice president, and then now as president. And it's just okay. It's okay to lie, right? Or it's just assumed, everyone's just like, okay, we know politicians lie. They just lie. It's, it's part of what we expect. They lied us into war. The results come in, it shows that they lied. Everyone's like, they kind of lied to us. And that's just the new normal. But it shouldn't be. You understand this? And, when you experience people lying to you in your personal life, sometimes big lies, you find out your parents lied to you, they lied to you about Santa Claus, right? Whatever it might be. And then you find out these politicians have big lies, and corporations, and the media's lying. They're supposed to be telling you the truth, but they lie more than anybody and manipulate you. Corporations, commercials, and then celebrities and the movies you watch, and everything that you see is a lie. And when that's the case, then anything can be the truth, right? Even something crazy. Like I was trying to say the other day, this is a problem with the truth community. There are things that are crazy that might be, true, but you really can't get the majority of people to believe in those. You can't, fight over those things, right? You got to sort of see, all right, this thing's just too out there for most people. And so if you really want to, win people over to this idea, this movement, you have to be much more reasonable. Don't come out with outlandish things when they're not even able to see the small lies, even though most people know that the politicians lie. And once they lie to you, once they're wrong, like the intelligence community, once you know that they lie, and then when you see that they're wrong over and over again, then there's no reason to trust them about anything. The CIA, the government, the media, Hollywood, athletes, all the people in the so-called show. There's no reason to trust any of them. And that's, the point of this video. And so when JoJo Magoo says, we don't know how much the Afghanistan war cost, it's at least $1 trillion, but could be $2 trillion. Well, where'd that other $1 trillion go? And then you see these Afghani troops with these weapons and things, and you're like, WTF, right? Just think about it. I mean, what a debacle, what an absolute shit show, and just an illusion, and a malevolent illusion America is. Like, we're the evil empire, and they're lying to you. And Trump did the same thing, you Trumpers. I mean, it's not just Biden, it's a part of what they do. They tell you what you want to hear. You would have turned on Trump. Trump could have been a liberal. He could have ran as a Democrat, right? I mean, he was, he gave money to the Clintons. He had Democratic views. He had liberal views. And so Trump just, went hard to the right. That's, just as a politically, and he was advised to do that. And he told you what you want to hear, you Trumpers. But at the end of the day, you can't trust any of these people. You can't trust people in the truth community. You can't trust any of it. It's just, a shit show of lies. People are lying all the time, so much so they forget about their own lies. They don't even realize when they're lying. That's why I'm saying you got to go to the source and not in some, a book type fashion or listen to other people. You have to connect to God directly. If you want to see the truth, you have to connect to the source of truth. I mean, that's what the heartfulness system does for people, not in some way that you have to buy into a dogma or a philosophy. You are put in direct contact with God, and you can ask God directly, and God can answer your questions. If you're able to, do that, if you're able to free your mind of your own personal prejudices, if you're able to, come to God as an innocent child and allow God to, present the information to you in this state of ignorance, like a spiritual ignorance, where God just shows you everything, like he's, like a father taking a child, a toddler around and pointing out and saying, this is a tree, this is a butterfly, this is a dog, this is, a bee, this is a flower, right? And so if you take that approach and you connect to God directly, you can find the truth. Otherwise, it's just a shitstorm of lies. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.